Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan, and today we are going to be ranking the best and the worst free agency signings so far. Now, we're only really a day into free agency, but we've already seen so much of the talent already available, swooped up by different NHL teams, and given new deals for the 2022 NHL season. But what deals and what contracts do I see as the best, the worst, and everything in between? Watch till the end for all the best, all the worst contracts, and hit that subscribe button if you are new. 60% of the people watching the videos are not subscribed. If you like hockey, this is the place to be. Now, how today's video is going to work is that we're going to go through 5 of the best and 4 of the worst signings so far in NHL free agency. And you know what? We're not even going to waste any time. Let's go to the first best signing. One of the best signings I think we've seen so far in free agency, but honestly, surprisingly solid value for what I thought this guy could get. Now, we're going to move on to the Montreal Canadiens and not move on to their biggest cap hit move, actually not in my coffin, but going into a guy that got $1 million less in David Savard. Now, the 30-year-old defenseman, I thought going into the open market could be a guy that got 4.5, 5 million, maybe even 5.5 or 6 in the open market, especially with Alec Martinez and other defensemen being already taken off. With Savard, though, it seemed like there was always interest in Montreal, and we eventually saw that fit happen. He ended up taking $3.5 million for the next 4 seasons, and I love this deal for the Montreal Canadiens. He was fantastic in the playoffs for Tampa, but he's just an under-the-radar, physical defensive defenseman that provides a lot of the good values you want. Great character, great hard worker as well, and the skating isn't too bad either. Provides some good physicality too for the Montreal Canadiens, and even though they could use a major puck mover, obviously Dougie Hamilton would be awesome on that team. David Savard is a solid replacement for Weber, not just on the ice, but in the locker room, and I think Montreal did well here. He at 3.5 after he won the Stanley Cup in a great role there, and his prime as a defenseman. Really shocking they made this happen, but it seemed like Savard wanted to be a Montreal Canadian, and it also shows in the cap hit. But now we can move on to one of the worst signings of NHL free agency, a move that I just don't really see the reason for here. We're going to move on to a deal from the Carolina Hurricanes and move on to the Freddie Andersen signing. Now, Frederik Andersen on paper for the Canes might not be the worst thing in the world. He has experienced a ton of injuries lately, but who knows if he's able to rebound. That is a big if. But the Carolina Hurricanes gave him a 2-year contract with an average annual value of $4.5 million. And guess what Alex Nedeljkovic, the guy that was top 3 on Calder Trophy nominees, was asking for? He was a top 3 Calder nominee. He was asking for 3.5. Nedeljkovic had like a 920 save percentage this year, and when it comes to Freddie Andersen, he had like an 895. The contrast isn't even close, and Nedeljkovic is way younger, way more enticing, has way more potential, and Freddie Andersen is coming after countless injuries, countless inconsistencies. Maybe he finds his game in Carolina, but to me, it's not a good fit. To me, the cap hit sucks, and what Carolina had to give up to get him on the team just is baffling. You couldn't have given Nedeljkovic $3.5 million. He is a way better option when it costed $1 million less, and you have like $30 million in cap space. Who the heck cares, Carolina? Pay your Calder nominee goaltender instead of bringing on an injury-riddled Freddie Andersen who is making more than what Nedeljkovic even wanted. There is no way that this whole ordeal makes sense in Carolina. I don't know what the heck's going on there. Maybe Nedeljkovic's killed somebody or something. At this point, who knows? But Freddie Andersen might be the starter there in Carolina, and I just have no idea what they're doing. But now we're going to move on to one of the best picks and one of the best signings of NHL free agency. We're actually going to go to the same team in the Carolina Hurricanes, the same position in goaltending, and move on to Antti Raanta. Now, I do believe there's some major contrast in terms of the Freddie Andersen deal and the Antti Raanta deal. Now, to me, if I was going to choose one guy, it would 100% be Antti Raanta. I think there's a much better chance that he's able to get back healthy and rebound well. When he was good in Arizona, he was really, really good. But even when Freddie Andersen was somewhat okay in Toronto, it just didn't really seem to work out. And Arizona's defense has been horrible this year, or these past couple of seasons. And even then, when he was kind of injured and injury-riddled, he had a 905 save percentage. Raanta wasn't that bad. Now, it is a 2-year deal at $2 million. I don't love the term per se, but it's a lot lesser of a risk than Freddie Andersen with $2.5 million more on the deal. To me, the Raanta deal makes a lot of sense for Carolina. You get a guy who could rebound well, and if he does, has proven to be solid under solid defenses in the past. But with Freddie Andersen, he's still been bad and still been injury riddled, even when the Leafs defense was better. So for me, I think there's a lot more potential in Raanta, and I would not be surprised if he's Carolina's starter by the end of next season. But now we're going to move on to one of the worst signings of NHL free agency, and this is also another situation where I think context desperately matters. With the Freddie Andersen situation, it also sucked because they gave away Nedeljkovic, who was asking for $1 million less and is way better. It's kind of the same situation with this signing, I personally think. We're going to move to one of the worst signings, move on to the Edmonton Oilers, and move on to Cody Ceci. Now again, this contract I think means a lot of context, because on paper, with Ceci, he was very, very solid in Pittsburgh last year, and if he continues that performance, it would still be a decent contract and a decent guy to have. But at the same time, there were so many good options available on your own team. Adam Larsson got signed for $4 million. And I'd much rather have Adam Larsson at like even 4.5 than Cody Ceci at 3.2. And that's where I think the context really matters with the Edmonton Oilers. Is it's not just the signings they made, it's the potential they missed out on. How do you give up Adam Larsson after you had so much contract negotiation, so much time to negotiate a new contract, and you just completely flubbed it? He was amazing for you on defense last year, and you just give him up for nothing. Instead, you signed Barrie for $500,000 more than he got in Seattle. I just don't get it. And I think that when it comes to Larsson, you would have had to pay him more than Seattle, obviously. But at the same time, you couldn't have made the contract work. You couldn't have done something, Ken Holland. To me, it's just a lot of lack of foresight. Honestly, a great defensive defenseman you could have had, who could have solved a lot of issues for your defense long term. And now he's gone to Seattle. He's gone to a division rival now, and you're stuck with Cody Ceci, who could still be decent, but you could have had Adam Larsson, who would still be an amazing defenseman for you. Just terrible asset management by Edmonton, and I still can't believe what their defense is looking like right now. It's just not good. But now we're actually going to move on to a great signing when it comes to defensemen, a deal that I absolutely loved for this Pacific Division team. And even though their offseason hasn't been amazing, to say the least, they made some baffling moves. This whole contract, this whole extension was an absolute slam dunk. He was going to be one of the best UFAs in the entire class, but ended up being re-signed, this time by the Vegas Golden Knights and Alec Martinez. Now, to me, Alec Martinez was a guy that if he went to the open market, could have gotten at least 6, maybe 6.5, maybe even 7 if it's a really short-term deal. But Alec Martinez signed for 3 years in Vegas, which I thought was maybe going to get $6 million, maybe 6.5, but he comes down to Vegas at $5.25 million. Just a fantastic deal by the Vegas Golden Knights. And even though, again, their offseason has been mostly puzzling with the whole situation of the Marc-Andre Fleury situation, this contract extension was a slam dunk. Martinez apparently loves it in Vegas, wants to stay there, and was amazing for them, especially this past season. He's a big part of that defense, and Vegas would have been lost without him in the playoffs last year, and Pietrangelo, of course, but Martinez was a big part of their success last season. He'll need to stay there and keep his play for Vegas to have a good chance in the playoffs next year, I think. They'll still be a playoff team for sure, but Martinez makes it a lot sure of a bet. And again, I thought he could have gotten a massive payday in free agency, but he sticks in Vegas where he wants to be, and honestly, massive respect to him. But now we're going to continue on the trend of defense, and then we're actually going to go on to a pretty bad contract here. Now, I will say this, I don't think in terms of the average annual value it's that horrible. I wouldn't pay him that much, but it's mostly the term and, again, the other options they could have had that disappoint me personally. We're now going to move on to the Boston Bruins, who had a pretty good free agency, all things considered, but actually move on to one of the worst signings, I think, of free agency in Derek Forbort. Now, to me, the Bruins, again, did very, very well in free agency, but the defense is still a little bit of a question mark. Forbort, I think, can be solid there, though, as a physical, big defenseman. Obviously, he's just an absolute truck out there. But besides that, he can't skate all too well. He gets blown by quite a bit occasionally, especially with the Winnipeg Jets. He's a guy that, in terms of just physical play, can definitely bring that presence, and that is valuable for sure. But for me, in Boston, I feel like they had real potential. I mean, Savard only got $500,000 more and a year more in Montreal. And I think you definitely would have needed to pay Savard more to be in Boston, but at the same time, you could have gotten a much more well-rounded option for me in Boston than Derek Forbort's in the Boston Bruins system. I mean, $3 million for 3 seasons, that to me is quite a bit of an overpay for Forbort, and it would have been fine, I think, for a 1-year deal, and I think Forbort deserves a payday, good for him, but for 3 years, for a guy who can barely skates. I mean, he can defend decently well, I guess, but can't produce any offense. It's an interesting bet for the Boston Bruins for sure. And again, besides this, I think their free agency was pretty spectacular. Now, to highlight that fantastic free agency for the Boston Bruins, let's actually go to a fantastic signing here from the Boston Bruins. And in my opinion, one of their best of the past couple of years, it comes in the form of Nick Foligno. Now, Nick Foligno, as a 33-year-old winger, I thought on a 2-year deal would have gotten at least $4.5 million. This is a sturdy, great character forward who can bring a lot of intangibles. I thought he'd get some major money. But he actually goes to the Boston Bruins 2 years, $3.8 million per. And I think that's a fantastic deal. But there also was a fantastic story alongside this signing. I believe it was last year. Unfortunately, Nick Foligno's daughter was in serious medical issues, and I think was transported to one of the Boston Children's Cares over there, one of the big hospitals there that were focused, of course, on children's health. And apparently, the doctors over there in Boston were able to make it all right and be able to save her life practically. Nick Foligno was talking about that on TSN, how the doctors there practically saved her life, and that was one of the reasons why Nick Foligno actually signed in Boston for this deal. And that to me is such a heartwarming story. It's obviously a scary story, but it still means a lot that for Nick Foligno that ended up happening. He's repaying the debts in the city where it happened too. I think that's an amazing story, and I think Nick Foligno will play it hard, or play it well with hard work, hard results, and who knows, maybe a Stanley Cup for the Boston Bruins. It would be an amazing story, and already is an amazing story, but Nick Foligno, just a class act through and through, continues to show why he's one of the best humans in the entire NHL. But before we get into the last best pick of free agency, we're going to go through two of the worst signings, I think, of free agency so far that I think present some big risk, maybe some reward, but I think most likely these two signings could be ones that these both respective teams regret. We're now going to start out with the worst signings of free agency, and in terms of term, there's not too much. It's a 1-year deal, but I still think in terms of repercussions could be awful for this team. We're now going to move on to the Philadelphia Flyers. They're only signing a free agency coming in the form of Martin Jones. Now, Martin Jones, in terms of his play these past couple of years, doesn't deserve anything more than $1 million. Let's be honest here. This guy got $2 million from the Philadelphia Flyers. And honestly, I respect the grind. His agent must be absolutely amazing. But Martin Jones has been horrible. Absolutely horrible in San Jose. And to me, the big problem with Philadelphia last year was just a lack of a great 1B option for Philadelphia to turn to when Carter Hart was struggling, or he needed somebody else to guide him, or somebody else to take a game from him. Brian Elliott was okay in that position, but they needed somebody else. And they got Martin Jones, who's one of the most inconsistent, just awful goaltenders in terms of starting goaltenders out there right now. To me, it makes no sense why the Philadelphia Flyers would do this. You need any sort of stability in net, and you go for Martin Jones? But we're going to move on to the next bad signing of free agency, and I want to say this right now. This could have, I think, the biggest potential to blow up in my face, because I think if this player is healthy and ready to go, he could actually be a solid player for this team. We're going to move on to the Chicago Blackhawks, though, and move on to their interesting signing of Jake McCabe. $4 million, 4 years for the 27-year-old injury-prone defenseman. To me, with Jake McCabe, he's put up some really underrated results these past few years, but especially before he was injured in Buffalo this past season, was phenomenal. Just absolutely amazing. I think he only played like 13 games before the injury, but it was fantastic. And then he had the season-ending injury that put him all throughout the rest of the year, and you saw Buffalo go on a decline as a result. To me, when it comes to Jake McCabe, if he's able to get back to that level, this contract looks fine, it looks solid, it looks decent, maybe even good even. But if it doesn't, and the health comes back to bite McCabe, or he can't get back to that supreme level, then this could be an awful deal for Chicago. It is 4 years. This is a huge bet. I'm hoping Chicago did their homework, because as of right now, this could have a bunch of boom or bust potential. We'll see what happens in Chicago. They've already had a ton of salary handed out. McCabe, just another guy on top of that. But if if McCabe rebounds, Chicago could be very, very solid. But again, those are some big ifs. We'll see what happens with McCabe. He's a fantastic person, though. Hoping the best for him in Chicago, but it's a massive risk for the Blackhawks. But hey, for Jake McCabe's agents, once again, go get him, Tiger, because doing so far so good with Jake McCabe. $4 million, 4 years, not a bad signing for Jake McCabe himself. And hey, just saying, going from the Buffalo Sabres to making $4 million for 4 years, not the worst bet in the world for Jake McKay. But we're now going to move on to one of the best signings of free agency. And you know what? I'm going to say it right now. In my opinion, the best signing of free agency thus far. A guy that was not qualified by the Chicago Blackhawks, interestingly enough, I thought put up some great results in his rookie season and could be a guy that could be dominant for the Detroit Red Wings. We're now going to move on to the best Red Wings the best free agent signing, I think, in the NHL today, in Pius Suter. Now, Pius Suter is one of the most interesting under-the-radar centermen right now in the NHL. I thought would be the most underrated free agent and one of the most under-key signings throughout free agency. And he was a guy that we were seeing maybe getting a contract extension or maybe signing a deal like a week after free agency. But he signed on day one and he goes to Detroit, and I think a deal that benefits both sides exceedingly well. When it comes to Detroit, they signed him for 2 years, $3.25 million. But he's 25, right smack dab in his prime. And I think this is another deal that Steve Yzerman is just cooking up, just loving right now, as he should. Pius Suter was fantastic for the Chicago Blackhawks last year, and even though he wasn't on my top 3 Calder nominees, mostly because of his age, he was still a really effective, great passing, great offensive IQ centerman who had some good face-off ability, had some decent defensive acumen as well, and really put up a strong game in Chicago. To me, in Detroit, as a second-line center behind Dylan Larkin, that might be just what Dylan Larkin needs to actually get some of the pressure off him. Somebody at least can play those second line center minutes. And now I think when it comes to Suter, he could definitely fill in that role of a penalty kill, power play, versatile forward that can really do it all. I think with some of those snipers as well in Detroit, alongside Robbie Fabry, I think that deal could be fantastic. He played with him in junior, Suter and Fabry, and I think it could be an amazing deal for both sides here. I think Suter will be a big part of Detroit's future, not just in 2 years or now, but in the huge future. Suter's a big part of that team though, and for Detroit is an excellent signing and one of the best they made in years. It's just what Steve Yzerman does. But that'll be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for coming in. If you did enjoy, make sure that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to know when we go live with new videos and new live streams. Make sure you comment down below what do you agree and disagree with, and who do you see and what contracts do you see as the worst and the best of free agency thus far. Let me know all your thoughts. Let me know as well. Share this video with your friends, by the way, if you haven't. Get the hockey rankings, get the free agency picks out there, and click on this card for all of my hockey rankings content. If I say prospects, I can't talk. Hockey rankings content right on my playlist. Thank you so much for watching, y'all. It is 100 degrees outside, so I unfortunately do have to go, but I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a fantastic day, and goodbye.